Officer Derek Shaw's voice was cold and commanding as he stepped closer. "Hands behind your back, ma'am. That sweet little church lady act won't save you now." "Officer, please, I didn't take that bracelet." "Then explain why it was in your pocket. Don't tell me it just appeared there." "Someone planted it. Please check the cameras." "I don't check cameras for thieves in church clothes." "You're hurting my arm." "Good. Maybe pain will teach you respect. I only came to buy the birthday gift." "With what money? Cleaning coins and pity?" Derek Shaw grabbed both of Eleanor Brooks's arms and wrenched them behind her back. "Walk straight, or I'll make this whole mall watch me drag you." The crowd split, and two identical black men in decorated military uniforms stepped forward. One fixed his eyes on Derek Shaw and said, "Remove your hands from our mother." Derek Shaw didn't know the woman he was crushing had raised the two men who were about to turn his badge into evidence. The automatic doors of Oakwood Crossing Mall whooshed open as Eleanor Brooks stepped inside, clutching her worn leather purse against her chest. Morning sunlight streamed through the skylights, casting everything in a bright, cheerful glow that made the marble floors shine like mirrors. She smoothed down her blue cardigan with nervous fingers and adjusted the collar of her floral dress, the good one she saved for church and special occasions. Today felt special. After weeks of saving every spare dollar from her house-cleaning jobs, she finally had enough to buy something beautiful for little Aaliyah. Lydia Harper's daughter would be turning 6 soon, and Eleanor had promised her something sparkly. The child had clapped her tiny hands and bounced on her toes when Eleanor mentioned it. "Miss Ellie, will it be real silver?" Aaliyah had asked with wide, hopeful eyes. "Real as real can be, baby girl," Eleanor had promised. Walking through the busy shopping complex, Eleanor felt the familiar tightness in her chest that came from being in places where everything cost more than she made in a month. Teenagers lounged near the fountain, their designer sneakers worth more than her grocery budget. Young mothers pushed strollers past store windows, filled with things that sparkled and gleamed. Everyone looked so comfortable, so confident in their right to be here. Eleanor walked slower, her sensible shoes silent on the polished floor. She passed the food court where Lydia worked, serving pizza slices and fountain drinks to customers who barely looked at her. Through the window, she could see Lydia wiping down tables with the same careful attention she brought to everything. That young woman had come so far since the days when she and baby Aaliyah had nowhere to sleep. The jewelry store sat in the main corridor, its gold lettering spelling out Hargrove Jewelers in elegant script. Through the glass windows, Eleanor could see gleaming display cases filled with diamonds, pearls, and precious metals that caught the light like trapped stars. Her mouth went dry, but she forced herself forward. The charm bracelet she had seen in the window had been simple, just a thin silver chain with a tiny heart pendant. Nothing fancy, nothing that would make anyone think she didn't belong. A soft chime announced her entrance as she pushed open the heavy glass door. The air inside smelled like expensive perfume and leather, cool and clean in a way that made her suddenly aware of her own scent. Laundry detergent, and the faint smell of cleaning supplies that never quite left her hands. Behind the main counter stood a woman in her 40s, with perfect blonde hair pulled into a sleek bun. Her makeup was flawless, her black dress tailored and expensive. Diamond earrings caught the light as she turned her head, and her smile was bright and practiced as she spoke to a well-dressed couple examining tennis bracelets. "The clarity on these stones is exceptional," the woman was saying, her voice smooth and confident. "These pieces hold their value beautifully." Eleanor waited near the entrance, not wanting to interrupt. She folded her hands in front of her and tried to look like she belonged, even though every instinct told her to turn around and leave. The couple at the counter laughed at something the saleswoman said, and the sound was light and carefree, the kind of laughter that came from people who never worried about money. More customers entered behind Eleanor, a younger woman with salon-perfect hair and a designer handbag, followed by an elderly white man in an expensive suit. The saleswoman's eyes swept past Eleanor as if she were invisible, focusing immediately on the new arrivals. "Good morning," the woman called out brightly. "I'll be right with you." Eleanor's cheeks burned, but she stayed quiet. She had learned long ago that making a fuss only made things worse. Patient people got served eventually, Polite people got treated better than pushy ones. That was what her mother had taught her, and her mother's mother before that. The well-dressed couple finally made their selection, a tennis bracelet that probably cost more than Eleanor made in months. They paid with a credit card, laughing and holding hands as they left the store. The saleswoman immediately turned to the younger woman with the designer bag. "What can I help you find today?" she asked warmly. Eleanor cleared her throat softly. "Excuse me, ma'am." The woman's eyes flicked toward her for just a moment, cold and assessing, before returning to the younger customer. "I'm sorry, I'll be with you in just a moment." But the moment stretched on. The younger woman tried on rings and necklaces, asking detailed questions about settings and warranties. The elderly man joined the conversation, apparently her father, discussing payment options and insurance. The saleswoman, her name tag read Vanessa Hargrove, gave them her complete attention, pulling out additional pieces, offering champagne from a small refrigerator behind the counter. Eleanor's feet began to ache in her sensible shoes. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, still clutching her purse. Inside was exactly $73, money scraped together from cleaning houses, from skipping her own lunch to save the meal money, from walking to the grocery store instead of taking the bus. Another customer entered, a middle-aged white woman in yoga clothes and expensive sneakers. Vanessa's face lit up immediately. "Mrs. Patterson, how lovely to see you. Did the necklace work perfectly for your daughter's graduation?" Eleanor's shoulders sagged slightly, but she didn't leave. Aaliyah was counting on her. That little girl had already lost so much in her short life. Her father who left before she was born, the apartment they had been evicted from, the months of sleeping in Lydia's car before Eleanor had helped them find stable housing. Aaliyah deserved something beautiful, something that would make her feel special on her birthday. Finally, after a long wait, Vanessa finished with Mrs. Patterson and turned toward Eleanor with barely concealed impatience. Her smile was thin and cold, nothing like the warm expression she had given the other customers. "Yes? What do you need?" The words stung, but Eleanor kept her voice gentle and respectful. "Good morning, ma'am. I saw a charm bracelet in your window display recently, a simple silver one with a small heart. I was wondering if I might look at it, please." Vanessa's eyebrows rose slightly, and her gaze traveled from Eleanor's graying hair down to her worn shoes and back up again. "A silver charm bracelet," she repeated slowly, as if the words tasted unpleasant. "Yes, ma'am. It was in the front window on the left side. Very simple, nothing fancy." "And this would be for you?" "No, ma'am, it's a birthday gift for a little girl. She's turning 6. Vanessa's expression didn't soften. If anything, she looked more skeptical. "I see. And what's your budget for this gift?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Eleanor felt her cheeks grow warm, but she lifted her chin slightly. "I have $73 saved up." The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa's perfectly glossed lips pressed into a thin line, and she glanced around the store as if checking to see who might have overheard this embarrassing admission. "Ma'am," Vanessa said finally, her voice carefully controlled, "our silver pieces start at around $200. The charm bracelet you're referring to is actually $350. Eleanor's heart sank, but she nodded politely. "I see. Thank you for your time." She turned to leave, her face burning with shame and disappointment. Behind her, she heard Vanessa mutter something under her breath to another employee who had emerged from the back room, something about people who waste everyone's time. Eleanor's hand was on the door handle when the alarm screamed. The sound was piercing and aggressive, filling the store and spilling out into the mall corridor. Eleanor froze, her heart hammering against her ribs as heads turned throughout the shopping complex. The electronic shriek seemed to go on forever, echoing off the marble floors and glass storefronts. "Stop right there!" Vanessa's voice cut through the alarm, sharp and accusatory. "Security! Someone stop that woman!" Eleanor turned slowly, her eyes wide with confusion and growing horror. Shoppers in the corridor had stopped walking, their conversations dying as they stared in her direction. Cell phones appeared in hands, cameras pointing her way like weapons. "Ma'am?" Eleanor's voice came out as barely a whisper. "I don't understand." Vanessa stormed toward her, her heels clicking aggressively on the polished floor. Her face was flushed with what looked like righteous anger, But there was something else in her eyes, something cold and calculating that made Eleanor's stomach turn. "You know exactly what you did," Vanessa snapped, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I saw you slip something into your pocket while I was helping other customers." "I didn't," Eleanor started, but her voice cracked. The crowd was growing larger, people drawn by the commotion like moths to flame. Their faces blurred together, some curious, some judgmental, some already convinced of her guilt. "Security is on the way," Vanessa announced to the gathering crowd, as if she were the victim of a terrible crime. "I can't believe someone would steal from a family business like this." Eleanor's hands shook as she clutched her purse tighter. "Ma'am, I promise you, I didn't take anything. I looked at nothing except what you showed me, and you didn't show me anything at all." But Vanessa wasn't listening. She was performing now, her voice carrying across the mall corridor. "This is exactly why small businesses are struggling. People think they can just walk in and help themselves to whatever they want." The heavy footsteps of mall security echoed through the corridor before Officer Derek Shaw appeared, his hand resting on his radio. He was a thick-set man in his late 30s, with close-cropped hair and small, suspicious eyes that immediately focused on Eleanor as if she were already guilty. "What's the situation here?" he demanded, his voice brusque and professional. Vanessa stepped forward immediately, her entire demeanor shifting to that of a traumatized victim. "This woman stole a bracelet from my store. I saw her take it while I was helping other customers. The alarm went off when she tried to leave." Officer Derek Shaw's gaze fixed on Eleanor with obvious disdain. He didn't ask for her side of the story. He didn't ask what she might have to say. Instead, he stepped closer, invading her personal space in a way that made her step backward. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to empty your pockets and your purse," he ordered. Eleanor's voice trembled as she tried to explain. "Officer, I didn't steal anything. I came here to buy a gift for a little girl's birthday. But the bracelet cost too much money, so I left. I don't know why the alarm went off, but I promise you I didn't take anything." "Empty your pockets," Derek Shaw repeated, louder this time, as if she were deaf or stupid. With shaking hands, Eleanor reached into the pocket of her cardigan. It was empty except for a tissue. She pulled it out and showed him, then did the same with her other pocket. Just her house key and a peppermint. "Your purse," Derek Shaw demanded. Eleanor opened her worn leather purse with trembling fingers, turning it upside down on a nearby bench. Out tumbled her wallet, her reading glasses, her small Bible with the cracked cover, her blood pressure medication, a grocery receipt, and a small wrapped coloring book she had bought for Aaliyah at the dollar store. "That's everything," she whispered, her voice breaking. "That's all I have." But Vanessa wasn't finished. She moved closer to Eleanor, her eyes scanning her clothing with the intensity of a hawk hunting prey. "Check her cardigan again," she instructed Officer Derek Shaw. "I know what I saw." Derek Shaw stepped forward and roughly patted down Eleanor's cardigan pockets again, his hands invasive and disrespectful. Eleanor stood perfectly still, tears beginning to gather in her eyes as the crowd watched her humiliation. "Nothing here," Derek Shaw muttered. But Vanessa's face showed no surprise. Instead, she moved even closer to Eleanor, reaching toward the left side of her cardigan with deliberate precision. "Wait," Vanessa said, her fingers sliding into a pocket that Derek Shaw had already checked. "What's this?" And from the depths of Eleanor's cardigan pocket, Vanessa withdrew a silver charm bracelet that gleamed under the mall's bright lights. Eleanor stared at this bracelet in complete shock, her mouth falling open. "That is not mine," she whispered, the words barely audible above the murmur of the crowd. The silver bracelet caught the overhead lights as it dangled from Vanessa's fingers, casting tiny reflections across the horrified faces of the gathering crowd. Eleanor stared at the jewelry in complete bewilderment, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. "That is not mine," she repeated, her voice stronger this time, but still trembling with shock. "I have never seen that bracelet before in my life." Officer Derek Shaw's expression hardened immediately. Without warning, he grabbed Eleanor's left arm and yanked it roughly behind her back. The sudden movement sent a sharp pain shooting through her shoulder and down her spine. "Ow!" Eleanor cried out, the sound escaping her before she could stop it. The pain was immediate and severe, made worse by her arthritis and the awkward angle Derek Shaw had forced her arm into.
"Please, you're hurting me."
"Ma'am, you need to cooperate," Derek Shaw barked, twisting her arm higher behind her back. His grip was unnecessarily tight, his fingers digging into the soft flesh of her upper arm, through the thin fabric of her cardigan. Vanessa stepped forward, her voice carrying across the mall corridor with practiced authority. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," she announced loudly, as if Eleanor were fighting back instead of simply crying out in pain. "Just admit what you did and this will all be over." The crowd murmured, their phones held high like judges passing verdict. To them, it looked like Eleanor was resisting arrest, struggling against the officer who was simply trying to do his job. They couldn't see the tears of pain streaming down her cheeks, or the way her knees were beginning to buckle from the pressure on her arm. From across the mall corridor near the bustling food court, Lydia Harper looked up from wiping down tables at the sound of commotion. When she saw the crowd gathered around the jewelry store, curiosity drew her closer. But when she spotted the familiar blue cardigan and gray hair in the center of the chaos, her heart stopped.
"Oh my God,"
Lydia whispered, immediately pulling out her phone. "That's Miss Eleanor." She held up her device and started recording, her hands shaking as she watched the woman who had saved her life being treated like a common criminal. The phone's camera captured everything: Derek Shaw's rough handling, Eleanor's tears, and the crowd's judgmental stares.
"Officer, please,"
Eleanor pleaded, her voice breaking as she tried to turn her head toward Derek Shaw. "I came here to buy a birthday present for a little girl named Aaliyah. Her mama works at the food court, and her birthday is coming up soon. I saved my cleaning money for weeks just to get her something nice." But Derek Shaw wasn't listening to her explanation. Instead, he reached for her purse with his free hand and dumped its contents onto a nearby display bench with deliberate roughness. Eleanor's personal belongings scattered across the marble surface, her worn leather wallet held together with rubber bands, her reading glasses with the cracked frame, her small Bible with pages soft from decades of use, and her blood pressure medication in its labeled prescription bottle. The grocery receipt from yesterday's shopping fluttered to the floor, a list of basic necessities purchased with careful budgeting. The wrapped coloring book for Aaliyah sat among the scattered items, its bright yellow paper decorated with balloons and birthday wishes that Eleanor had written in her careful handwriting.
"That's everything I own,"
Eleanor said quietly, her voice filled with dignity despite her humiliation. "Search it all. Count every penny in my wallet. You won't find anything that doesn't belong to me." Vanessa surveyed the meager contents with obvious disdain, her lip curling slightly at the sight of Eleanor's humble possessions. "The evidence speaks for itself," she declared, holding up the silver bracelet again. "This is a $350 piece from our premium collection. Grand theft." $350? Derek Shaw's eyebrows rose as he processed the dollar amount. "That makes this a felony charge, ma'am. You're looking at serious jail time." Eleanor's face went pale at his words. Her blood pressure, already elevated from the stress and humiliation, spiked dangerously. The mall corridor began to swim before her eyes, the faces in the crowd blurring together into an indistinct mass of judgment and condemnation.
"I didn't steal anything,"
she whispered, swaying slightly on her feet. "I don't even know how that bracelet got in my pocket. I was never alone near any jewelry. She watched me the whole time." But Derek Shaw was already reaching for his handcuffs, the metal clicking ominously as he prepared to secure them around her wrists. The sound made Eleanor's knees weak, and she felt a wave of dizziness wash over her.
"Please,"
she tried one more time, her voice barely audible above the crowd's murmurs. "I'm 72 years old. I clean houses for a living. Why would I risk everything I have for a bracelet I could never afford to buy?" The handcuffs snapped closed around her thin wrists, with a finality that echoed through the mall corridor. The metal was cold against her skin, and the weight of them seemed to drag her down toward the polished floor. As Derek Shaw began to march her through the gathering crowd, Eleanor's vision blurred with tears and rising blood pressure. Her steps were unsteady, each one a struggle to maintain her dignity in front of all these strangers who had already decided she was guilty. Lydia's phone continued recording as Eleanor passed by, capturing the moment when the elderly woman looked up toward the mall skylights and whispered, "Lord, don't let me fall in front of these people." The mall corridor stretched endlessly before Eleanor as Officer Derek Shaw guided her past the growing crowd of onlookers. Each step felt heavier than the last, her legs trembling not just from age but from the overwhelming humiliation of being paraded like a criminal through the place where she had simply wanted to buy a child's birthday present. The handcuffs cut into her wrists with each movement, the metal edges digging into skin that had grown thin and fragile over 7 decades of hard work. Her arthritis made the positioning excruciating, but Derek Shaw showed no consideration for her obvious discomfort. As he maintained his firm grip on her upper arm, shoppers pressed against the storefronts and gathered in clusters, their phones held high like weapons of judgment. Some whispered to their companions, others openly stared, and a few shook their heads in what might have been disgust or pity. Eleanor couldn't tell which was worse. "Keep moving," Derek Shaw muttered, his voice carrying the impatience of someone who wanted this spectacle over with quickly. "Security office is just ahead." But Eleanor's steps were growing more unsteady with each passing moment. The medication for her blood pressure was back in her scattered purse, and she could feel the familiar warning signs building behind her temples. The fluorescent lights above seemed too bright, the sounds of the mall too loud, and the faces around her too harsh. A young mother pulled her toddler closer as they passed, as if criminal behavior might be contagious. An elderly white man in an expensive suit shook his head and said to his companion, "Shame what some people will do for money." A group of teenagers snickered and pointed, one of them starting to record a video with commentary about crazy old ladies. Each reaction felt like another weight added to Eleanor's shoulders, bending her further toward the ground with shame she didn't deserve to carry. This was not how she had raised Malik and Darius to see her. This was not the legacy she wanted to leave behind after a lifetime of service, sacrifice, and quiet dignity. Just as the security office came into view and Eleanor's strength began to fail her completely, the crowd ahead began to shift and part like water around a stone. A ripple of awareness moved through the gathered shoppers, conversation stopping mid-sentence as heads turned toward the main entrance. 2 identical figures emerged from the parting crowd, and for a moment Eleanor thought her overwhelmed mind was playing tricks on her. The men were tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the precise, commanding stride that could only belong to career military officers. Their dress uniforms were immaculate, dark blue with crisp creases and gleaming brass buttons that caught the mall's fluorescent lighting. But it was their faces that made Eleanor's breath catch in her throat. Even after all these years, even though they had grown from scrawny teenagers into powerful men, she would have recognized those features anywhere. The same dark eyes that had looked up at her from makeshift cribs decades ago. The same stubborn jawline that had emerged during their teenage arguments. The same protective instincts that had led them to fight bullies in the schoolyard. Malik and Darius Brooks, her boys, her sons in every way that mattered, even though she had never given birth to them. The twins moved through the crowd with purpose, their military bearing commanding immediate respect from everyone around them. Shoppers stepped aside automatically, some recognizing the significance of the medals and ribbons displayed on their chests, others simply responding to the undeniable authority in their presence. Eleanor's knees nearly buckled as the reality hit her. They were here. After years of overseas deployment, after months of wondering if she would ever see them again, they had somehow appeared at the exact moment when she needed them most. "Malik?" she whispered, her voice so quiet it was almost lost in the ambient noise of the mall. "Darius?" But they had already seen her, and the expressions on their faces shifted from confusion to recognition, to a fury so intense it seemed to change the temperature of the air around them. Malik's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, his hands clenching at his sides. Darius's eyes blazed with an anger that made several nearby shoppers instinctively step back. Darius reached them first, his voice cutting through the mall corridor like a blade. "Take your hands off our mother." The words rang out with such authority and controlled rage that conversation stopped throughout the entire wing of the shopping center. Officer Derek Shaw's grip on Eleanor's arm loosened slightly as he turned to face this unexpected challenge, his confidence wavering for the first time since the arrest had begun. "Excuse me?" Derek Shaw said, trying to maintain his authoritative tone, but clearly rattled by the sudden appearance of two decorated military officers, who were obviously not intimidated by his badge or his attitude. "You heard him," Malik said, his voice calmer than his brother's, but somehow even more dangerous. He moved with the measured precision of someone accustomed to command, positioning himself so that he could see both Derek Shaw and Vanessa, who had followed them from the jewelry store. "Remove your hands from our mother immediately." Vanessa stepped forward, her expression shifting from surprise to annoyance as she realized her carefully orchestrated arrest was being disrupted. "This woman is under arrest for theft," she announced loudly, playing to the crowd that was now watching this confrontation with rapt attention. "Your relationship to her doesn't change the fact that she committed a crime." "What crime?" Darius demanded, his voice rising slightly as his protective instincts took over. "What evidence do you have beyond your word against hers?" Derek Shaw straightened, trying to reassert his authority in the face of these challenging questions. "She was caught with stolen merchandise in her possession," he said, gesturing toward the bracelet that Vanessa still held. "That's all the evidence I need." "Is it?" Malik asked, his tone deceptively conversational. "Because I'm familiar with arrest procedures, officer." He paused, looking pointedly at Derek Shaw's name tag. "Officer Shaw, and I'm curious about several aspects of how this arrest has been conducted." The crowd pressed closer, sensing that this confrontation was about to become much more interesting than a simple shoplifting arrest. Phones continued to record, but now they were capturing a very different kind of drama, one where the accused had powerful advocates willing to stand up for her. Eleanor looked up at her sons through tears of overwhelming emotion. Shame at being seen like this, relief that they were here, and a deep abiding love that had sustained her through decades of single motherhood. They had grown into exactly the kind of men she had hoped they would become, strong, principled, and unwilling to let injustice go unchallenged. "Boys," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion, "I didn't do anything wrong. I swear to you I didn't steal anything." Malik's expression softened immediately as he heard the pain in her voice, but his focus remained laser-sharp on the situation at hand. "We know, Mama," he said gently, his use of the childhood name making several nearby shoppers exchange surprised glances. "We know you didn't do anything wrong." But Derek Shaw was not prepared to back down, especially not in front of this crowd and these challenging questions about his procedures. His grip tightened on Eleanor's arm again, making her wince with pain. "Look," he said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "I don't care if you're military, circus performers, or the governor's sons. This woman is under arrest, and these cuffs stay on until we get to the security office and sort this out properly." Darius took a step forward, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, but Malik placed a restraining hand on his brother's arm before the situation could escalate further. "Mama," Malik said, his voice steady and reassuring despite the chaos around them. "We're here now." The mall security office smelled like stale coffee and industrial carpet cleaner. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the cramped space, filled with outdated monitoring equipment and metal filing cabinets. Eleanor sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, her hands still cuffed behind her back, despite Malik's repeated requests for their removal. Officer Derek Shaw positioned himself near the door like a guard, his arms crossed and his expression stubborn. Vanessa Hargrove stood beside the security desk, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the metal surface as she watched the proceedings with barely concealed irritation. Malik paced the small room with controlled precision, his military bearing evident in every measured step. Darius stood protectively beside Eleanor's chair, his jaw clenched so tightly that the muscles in his neck stood out like cords. "Let me explain this again," Malik said, his voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel that made everyone in the room pay attention. "My brother and I were already here at Oakwood Crossing Mall for the annual Georgia Veterans Charity Foundation ceremony being held in the community center wing." He paused, fixing Derek Shaw with a steady stare that had intimidated enemy combatants in multiple theaters of operation. "Our mother called my brother's cell phone this morning because she was nervous about shopping for a gift, and wanted advice about what a 6-year-old girl might like. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears as she remembered that conversation. She had been so worried about spending the money she had saved, so concerned about choosing something appropriate for Lydia's little girl. The phone call to Darius had been her way of calming her nerves, hearing a familiar voice before venturing into the expensive jewelry store that made her feel so out of place. "The call was cut off suddenly," Darius added, his voice tight with emotion. "We heard someone in the background accusing our mother of stealing. We came running." Vanessa rolled her eyes dramatically, as if this explanation was somehow suspicious rather than natural. "How convenient," she said with a sneer. "You just happened to be nearby when your mother decided to commit a felony." "Watch your mouth," Darius warned, taking a step toward her before Malik's restraining hand on his shoulder stopped him. "The timing isn't convenient," Malik said evenly. "It's fortunate for our mother and for the truth." He turned to face the mall security supervisor, a nervous middle-aged man named Ramirez, who had been trying to stay invisible since the twins arrived. "I want to see the security footage from your boutique, Ms. Hargrove, and from the hallway cameras outside your store." Vanessa's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a micro-expression that Malik caught immediately. Years of military intelligence training had taught him to read faces, to spot the tiny tells that revealed when someone was lying or hiding something important.
I'm afraid that's not possible,
she said, her voice taking on a tone of practiced regret that sounded rehearsed. "Our boutique camera malfunctioned earlier today. Technical difficulties, you understand." "What kind of technical difficulties?" Malik pressed, pulling out a small notebook from his uniform pocket. The gesture was subtle but meaningful. He was taking this seriously enough to document everything. "Just technical difficulties," Vanessa repeated, her voice becoming more clipped. "The system went down sometime this morning." Ramirez cleared his throat nervously. "The hallway camera outside Hargrove Jewelers also experienced some issues today," he admitted, not meeting Malik's eyes. "Lost feed for about several minutes during the time in question." The twins exchanged a look that spoke volumes. Malik's eyebrows rose slightly, his tell for when something was obviously wrong. Darius's hands clenched into fists, his response to obvious lies. "Several minutes exactly?" Malik asked, his tone deceptively casual. "That's a very specific malfunction window." "These things happen," Derek Shaw interjected, clearly wanting to move the conversation along. "Equipment fails. The important thing is we recovered the stolen merchandise from the suspect's possession." "The alleged stolen merchandise," Malik corrected sharply. "And I'd like to know more about this convenient camera failure that just happened to occur during the exact time period when the alleged crime took place." Vanessa's face flushed with what appeared to be righteous indignation. "Are you suggesting I'm lying?" she demanded, her voice rising. "I'm the victim here. This woman came into my store, stole from me, and now you're treating me like I'm the criminal." "Nobody's treating you like anything," Darius said, his voice dangerous. "We're asking reasonable questions about some pretty suspicious circumstances." "Suspicious?" Vanessa's voice became shrill. "The bracelet was found in her pocket. What more do you need? Are you saying I planted it there?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Eleanor felt something cold settle in her stomach. There was something about the way Vanessa asked that question. Too defensive, too specific, too much like someone who was trying to deflect suspicion by stating exactly what she had actually done. "The physical evidence speaks for itself," Derek Shaw said, moving to stand beside Vanessa in a show of solidarity. "The bracelet was recovered from the suspect's cardigan pocket. That's all I need to proceed with charges." "But how did it get there?" Malik asked, his investigator's instincts fully engaged now. "If the cameras aren't working, we only have Ms. Hargrove's word about what happened in that store." "My word should be enough," Vanessa snapped. "I'm a respected businesswoman. I've been running this boutique for years without a single problem. I don't need to lie about elderly thieves." The phrase hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Elderly thieves. The casual cruelty of it. The way Vanessa dismissed her as nothing more than a stereotype brought back memories of other times when she had been looked down upon, other moments when her poverty had been treated as evidence of moral failing. But it was what came next that made Eleanor's blood run cold. Vanessa stepped closer to her chair, ostensibly to retrieve something from the security desk, but as she passed behind Eleanor, she leaned down and whispered just loud enough for Eleanor to hear. "You should have stayed away from things that don't belong to you." The words hit Eleanor like a lightning bolt. That exact phrase, she had heard it before, decades ago, in a context that had nothing to do with shoplifting or jewelry stores. It had been spoken by a woman from child services, a cold, professional voice on the other end of a phone line, telling Eleanor that she had no right to keep Malik and Darius, that poor black women like her shouldn't try to claim children who belong somewhere better. Eleanor's hands began to tremble behind her back. This wasn't random. This wasn't a simple case of mistaken identity or unfortunate circumstances. Somehow, impossibly, this woman knew about the twins' past, knew about the legal battle Eleanor had fought decades ago to keep her boys. The room seemed to spin around her as the implications hit home. This was personal. This was targeted. And somehow, Vanessa Hargrove was connected to the people who had once tried to take her sons away from her. "Baby," Eleanor whispered, her voice so quiet that Malik had to lean down to hear her. Her eyes were wide with fear and recognition, and when she spoke, her words came out in a rush of terrified realization. "This woman knows something about when you were little." The police cruiser sat in the loading dock behind Oakwood Crossing Mall, like a metal vulture waiting to carry away its prey. Officer Derek Shaw had insisted on moving Eleanor through the service corridors to avoid the growing crowd of shoppers who had heard about the arrest. Some had come to gawk. Others had come because they recognized the name Mama Ellie from Lydia's rapidly spreading social media posts. Malik stood beside this police car, his military bearing rigid with barely contained fury. He had already made several phone calls, one to a military legal liaison, one to a civil rights attorney he knew from veterans advocacy work, and one to the base commander to inform him that 2 decorated Marine officers might need emergency leave to deal with a family crisis. Darius paced back and forth like a caged tiger, his dress uniform still pristine, but his composure fraying at the edges. Every few seconds he would stop and stare at the mall's back entrance, waiting for his mother to emerge. "The attorney will meet us at the station," Malik said quietly. "Simone Parker. She handles civil rights cases and police misconduct. If this goes to trial, she'll fight." "If this goes to trial," Darius's voice cracked with disbelief. "Malik, they planted evidence on our mother. This should never see the inside of a courtroom." "I know that. You know that. But proving it?" The service door opened with a metallic clang, cutting off Malik's words. But it wasn't Eleanor who emerged. Instead, a tall, silver-haired man in an expensive navy suit stepped into the loading dock area. His movements were smooth and confident. Everything about him screamed power and influence, from his Italian leather shoes to the gold watch glinting on his wrist. Councilman Victor Langston had arrived. The twins had never seen him before, but they recognized the type immediately. He was the kind of man who appeared at military ceremonies to shake hands and take photos, the kind who spoke about supporting the troops while cutting veterans' benefits behind closed doors. Power wrapped in patriotic rhetoric and campaign smiles. Victor walked directly to Officer Derek Shaw, who straightened up like a soldier snapping to attention. The conversation was brief and conducted in low tones, but the twins caught fragments carried by the afternoon breeze. "Need to be thorough. Community is watching. Upgrade the charges." Malik's jaw tightened. Upgrade the charges? For what? Finding planted evidence in an elderly woman's pocket? Vanessa appeared next, hurrying across the loading dock to join the whispered conference. She looked different now, less polished, more frantic. Her perfect hair was slightly mussed, and there were red marks on her neck that hadn't been there before. The conversation lasted exactly a few minutes. Malik timed it on his military watch, a habit ingrained by years of intelligence work where timing could mean the difference between life and death. When it ended, Victor shook Derek Shaw's hand like they were sealing a business deal. Then Vanessa walked back toward the service entrance, but she made a detour that brought her close to where the twins stood waiting. "Officers," she said, her voice carrying a tremor that sounded suspiciously like poorly acted distress. Derek Shaw pulled out his notebook with obvious eagerness. "What kind of additional statement?" "When your mother stole that bracelet," Vanessa said, speaking loudly enough for the twins to hear every word. She didn't just take it quietly. When I confronted her, she became violent. She shoved me against the jewelry display case and scratched my neck when I tried to stop her. The lie was so outrageous, so clearly fabricated, that Darius actually laughed out loud, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed off the concrete walls. "You're lying," he said flatly. "Our mother wouldn't hurt a fly. She's 72 years old with arthritis in both hands."
Are you calling me a liar?
Vanessa's voice rose to a theatrical pitch.
Look at my neck. Look at these scratches. Your mother did this when she attacked me.
She tilted her head to show the red marks, and Malik studied them with the clinical eye of someone trained to assess battlefield injuries. The scratches were shallow, precise, and perfectly positioned for maximum visibility. They looked like they had been made with fingernails, but not in the desperate, irregular pattern that would result from an actual struggle. These were methodical, deliberate, self-inflicted. "Those are fresh," Malik said quietly. "Very fresh. Made within the last few minutes." "How dare you?" Victor Langston said, stepping forward for the first time. His voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "Are you suggesting Ms. Hargrove injured herself? That's a serious accusation to make against a respected member of this community."
As serious as falsely accusing our mother of assault?
Darius shot back, taking a step toward Victor that made Derek Shaw's hand drift toward his weapon. "Your mother," Victor said the word like it tasted bitter, "committed theft and assault. The evidence speaks for itself. And I would suggest, gentlemen, that military uniforms don't frighten people in positions of authority. Not in this town." The threat was subtle, but clear. Victor Langston was a man who could make problems for military careers, who had connections that reached into places where decorated service records could suddenly develop complications. Officer Derek Shaw had already begun rewriting his report, upgrading the charges based on Vanessa's new statement. Simple theft became theft and assault. Eleanor's confused protests in the security office became combative behavior and resistance to arrest. "This is insane," Darius said, his voice rising dangerously. "You people are manufacturing crimes out of thin air." "Darius." Malik's voice carried a warning, but his brother was past the point of military discipline.
"No, Malik. They're railroading her. They're adding charges like items to a grocery list."
"Major Brooks." Victor's voice cut through Darius's anger like ice. "I suggest you control yourself. Threatening behavior toward civilians reflects poorly on the uniform you wear." "I'm not threatening anyone," Darius said through gritted teeth. "I'm stating facts, and the fact is that you people are framing an innocent woman." The service door opened again, and this time Eleanor emerged, walking slowly between two officers. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by the handcuffs and the institutional fluorescent lighting that followed her out into the afternoon sun. Her blue cardigan was wrinkled, her floral dress disheveled from the search and processing. When she saw her sons waiting by the police car, her face crumpled with shame and relief in equal measure.
"Baby, don't,"
she said to Darius, who had started toward her with his hands outstretched. "Don't ruin your life over me. Don't let them hurt your career." The words hit Darius like physical blows. Here was the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise them, begging them not to sacrifice anything for her. It was exactly backward, exactly wrong, and exactly what Eleanor would do. "Mama, we're not going anywhere," Malik said firmly. "We're going to fix this." "There's nothing to fix," Victor said smoothly. "Justice is taking its course. Your mother will have her day in court, where she can present her side of the story to a jury of her peers." As the officers helped Eleanor into the back of the police cruiser, Victor Langston watched with satisfaction. He had turned a simple shoplifting arrest into something more serious, something that would keep the old woman quiet and send a message to anyone else who might cause problems for his family's interests. The car pulled away from the loading dock, carrying Eleanor toward the county jail. Malik watched it disappear around the corner of the mall, his mind already working through legal strategies and evidence chains. "This is no longer an arrest," he told his brother as Lydia's arrest video began spreading across local community Facebook pages and neighborhood apps. "This is a cover-up." The county holding facility smelled like disinfectant and despair. Eleanor sat on a metal bench that had been designed by someone who had never considered that a 72-year-old woman with arthritis might need to rest her bones for hours at a time. The fluorescent lights above hummed with the persistence of mosquitoes, casting everything in a sickly white glow that made her brown skin look gray and tired. Her blood pressure medication remained locked in her purse somewhere in the evidence room, along with her Bible and the little coloring book she had bought for Lydia's daughter. The booking officer had asked her medical questions with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. High blood pressure? Check. Arthritis? Check. Any allergies? No. Any suicidal thoughts? The question had confused her so much that she had just stared at him until he moved on. The holding area contained 6 other women, most of them decades younger than Eleanor. They regarded her with curiosity and something approaching sympathy. An elderly black woman in church clothes was not the usual demographic for Saturday afternoon arrests.
"What they get you for, Grandma?"
asked a thin woman with track marks on her arms and kindness in her eyes.
"They say I stole a bracelet,"
Eleanor said quietly, her voice hoarse from hours of explaining her innocence to people who did not care to listen.
"Did you?"
"No, baby. I never stole nothing in my life." The woman nodded as if this made perfect sense. In a place like this, innocence and guilt were luxuries that only lawyers and judges could afford to debate. What mattered was surviving until someone posted bail or a public defender showed up with a plea deal. Eleanor closed her eyes and tried to pray, but the words felt heavy and distant.
"Lord," she thought, "I don't understand this test. I tried to live right. I tried to raise those boys right. Why am I here?"
Outside, Malik and Darius paced the parking lot like caged wolves, while attorney Simone Parker made phone calls with the rapid-fire efficiency of someone who had fought too many battles like this one. She was sharp-featured and sharp-dressed, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a way that suggested she had no patience for nonsense from judges, prosecutors, or lying police officers. "The magistrate won't see her until morning," Simone said, ending another call with barely controlled frustration. "They're claiming the weekend docket is full, but I suspect someone made a phone call suggesting they take their time." "Can't we post bail tonight?" Malik asked. "Not until she's formally charged and appears before the magistrate. And Derek Shaw's report is problematic." She flipped through the pages with obvious disgust. He's claiming she resisted arrest, made threatening statements, and had to be physically subdued for officer safety. This language is designed to make her look dangerous, which will influence how the magistrate sets bail. "She's a 72-year-old woman with arthritis," Darius said, his voice tight with rage. "What threatening statements could she possibly make?" According to Officer Derek Shaw, she said, and I quote, "You people don't know who you're messing with. My sons will make you pay for this." Simone looked up from the report. "Did she say anything like that?" "Absolutely not," Malik said immediately. "Mama would never threaten anyone. She barely raised her voice when we were kids, even when we deserved it. That's what I figured. But this language in police reports hardens cases. Judges see threatening statements and resistance to arrest, and they start thinking about public safety instead of an elderly woman's dignity." Darius pulled out his phone and scrolled through the notifications that had been piling up all afternoon. "Lydia's video is spreading fast. Look at this." He showed them his screen, where the shaky phone footage of Eleanor's arrest had already gathered hundreds of comments and shares across multiple local Facebook pages and neighborhood apps. The video clearly showed Officer Derek Shaw twisting Eleanor's arm behind her back while she cried out in pain, with Vanessa Hargrove standing nearby directing the scene like a stage manager. The comments were a mixture of outrage and recognition. "That's Mrs. Eleanor from the school cafeteria. She used to give kids extra food when she knew they were hungry at home. Mama Ellie helped my family when we got evicted, brought us groceries, and never asked for nothing back. This woman raised those twin boys who joined the Marines. She's been taking care of people in this community for decades. Look how they're treating her. That cop is hurting her on purpose. I know her from Mount Zion Baptist. Sister Eleanor never hurt a fly. This is wrong." But mixed in with the support were uglier comments. If she didn't steal nothing, why did they find it in her pocket? These people always cry racism when they get caught. The store manager wouldn't lie about something like this. Malik read through the comments with the analytical eye of someone trained to assess intelligence reports. The community support was building, but so was the narrative that Victor Langston and Vanessa were trying to construct. Eleanor was becoming a symbol, and symbols were dangerous things to be in a world where powerful people had reputations to protect. "We need more than community support," he said. "We need evidence." "I've already filed motions for all available security footage," Simone said. "But given the convenient malfunctions, I'm not optimistic. However, I'm also requesting records of any other similar accusations made by Ms. Hargrove in the past year." "You think she's done this before?" "Experienced thieves don't usually plant evidence in full view of security cameras, but experienced con artists develop patterns. If we can show a history of false accusations, especially targeting vulnerable elderly women, it could be the leverage we need." Late into the night, Malik was finally allowed to see Eleanor through the glass partition in the visiting area. She looked smaller than he remembered, diminished by the institutional orange jumpsuit and the harsh lighting that made everyone look sick. When she saw him, she pressed her hand against the glass and tried to smile. "Baby, you should go home," she said through the phone that connected them. "You shouldn't have to see me like this." "Mama, we're not going anywhere." His voice was steady, but his eyes blazed with the controlled fury that had made him effective in combat situations. "This ends tomorrow. By dawn, we start taking them apart." The county courthouse steps were already crowded with reporters and camera crews when Eleanor walked out into the morning sun, flanked by Malik and Darius. The bail hearing had been swift, but humiliating. $5,000 bond for an elderly woman with no criminal record, all because Officer Derek Shaw's report painted her as a dangerous repeat offender who might flee. "Mrs. Brooks! Mrs. Brooks!" Voices called out from the press pack. "Do you have a statement about the theft charges? Did you really assault the store manager? What do you say to people who think this is about race?" Eleanor kept her eyes down, gripping Malik's arm tightly. The orange jumpsuit had been replaced by her own clothes, the same blue cardigan and floral dress she had worn to the mall the day before, now wrinkled from spending the night folded on a holding cell bench. She looked fragile in the harsh camera lights, overwhelmed by the attention that had transformed her from a private person into a public spectacle overnight. "No questions," Malik said firmly, his military bearing cutting through the chaos like a blade. "My mother needs rest." But before they could reach their car, another cluster of reporters suddenly shifted their attention to the courthouse entrance. Victor Langston emerged, perfectly groomed in a navy suit and red tie, looking every inch the confident politician. He paused at the top of the steps, surveying the cameras with the practiced eye of someone who understood exactly how to control a narrative. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor began, his voice carrying easily across the courthouse plaza. "I want to address the situation at Oakwood Crossing Mall yesterday, because I believe it's important that the community understand what's really happening here." The twins stopped walking. Eleanor tugged at Malik's arm, wanting to escape, but both men had gone still with the focused attention of soldiers recognizing an enemy, making a tactical move. "Local businesses are under siege," Victor continued, his tone measured but grave. "In recent months, we've seen a disturbing pattern of organized theft targeting our shopping centers, with particular focus on jewelry stores and boutiques. These thieves are not desperate people stealing food. They are coordinated criminals who specifically target high-value merchandise and then claim discrimination when they're caught." A reporter called out, "Are you saying Mrs. Brooks is part of an organized crime ring?" "I'm saying that what happened yesterday was not an isolated incident," Victor replied smoothly. "Store security cameras have been disabled or tampered with during multiple theft attempts. Suspects have used nearly identical stories about misunderstandings and planted evidence. And now we see the same pattern of social media campaigns designed to turn criminals into sympathetic victims." Eleanor's face crumpled. She pressed her hand to her chest, feeling her heart race as Victor's words painted her as a professional thief, a con artist, a dangerous person who had fooled her entire community. "That's not true," she whispered, but her voice was lost in the chaos of reporters shouting follow-up questions. Victor raised his hand for quiet. "I want to be very clear. This is not about race or age. This is about accountability. When someone steals from a local business, damages property, and then assaults the manager trying to recover stolen goods, That person must face consequences, regardless of who their children are or what uniforms those children wear. The calculated cruelty of that last line hit like a physical blow. Victor wasn't just attacking Eleanor. He was deliberately diminishing Malik and Darius's military service, reducing their accomplishments to irrelevant details that couldn't excuse their mother's supposed crimes. Darius took a step toward the courthouse steps, his jaw tight with barely controlled rage. But Malik caught his arm. "Not here," Malik murmured. "Not like this." Before they could leave, Vanessa Hargrove appeared beside Victor, dressed in a conservative black suit that made her look like a grieving widow. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and she dabbed at them with a tissue as cameras focused on her face. "I hate that this has become so public," Vanessa said, her voice catching with practiced emotion. "I never wanted to press charges. I tried to handle it quietly, but when that woman pushed me and scratched my arm while trying to escape with the bracelet, I had no choice." She rolled up her sleeve to show a thin red mark on her forearm, a mark that could have come from anything but looked dramatic under the camera lights. "I've worked in retail for years," Vanessa continued. "I've never had someone become violent like that. It was terrifying. And now my family is getting death threats because people think I'm lying about what happened." The lie was so smooth, so believable, that several reporters nodded sympathetically. Vanessa had transformed herself from aggressor to victim, from the person who planted evidence to the innocent businesswoman traumatized by a violent criminal. "My heart goes out to those young men," she added, glancing toward the twins with perfectly calculated pity. "They're clearly good people who served our country, but they weren't there yesterday. They didn't see what I saw, and it's heartbreaking that their mother's choices are now affecting their reputations." The press conference was a masterpiece of manipulation. Victor and Vanessa had taken every element that made Eleanor sympathetic, her age, her son's service, the community support, and flipped them into reasons why her guilt was more tragic, not less likely. Shortly after, they sat in Lydia Harper's small apartment a few blocks from the courthouse, the blinds drawn against the reporters who had followed them. Lydia had taken the day off from her food court job to help, and her 6-year-old daughter was staying with neighbors to keep the apartment quiet. Simone Parker spread papers across Lydia's kitchen table, while Eleanor sat in the corner chair, looking defeated. The recorded press conference played on Lydia's laptop, and each replay seemed to drain more fight from Eleanor's shoulders. "Turn it off," Eleanor said quietly. "Please. We need to study their strategy," Simone replied, but she closed the laptop. "They're trying to control the narrative before we can present evidence." "What evidence?" Eleanor asked bitterly. "The cameras were broken. They found a bracelet in my pocket. That man just told the whole world I'm a career criminal who attacks people." "Mama, you know that's not true," Darius said, kneeling beside her chair. "Knowing and proving are different things, baby." Eleanor's voice was flat, exhausted. "Maybe I should just take whatever plea they offer. Plead guilty to something small and make this whole thing disappear." "Absolutely not," Malik said firmly. "I'm 72 years old. I've been poor my whole life. Poor people learn when to lower their eyes and move on. Fighting back just makes things worse." "You didn't teach us that," Darius said, his voice intense. "You taught us to stand up. You taught us that right is right, no matter who says different." "I taught you that because I wanted you to have a life better than mine. But this is my life. This is what happens to people like me." Lydia, who had been quiet throughout the conversation, suddenly spoke up from the kitchen where she was making coffee. "Mrs. Eleanor, you remember when I was sleeping in my car with baby girl? Remember how you brought us food every day and never made me feel ashamed?" Eleanor looked up. "That was different." "No, ma'am, it wasn't. You told me that sometimes the world tries to convince good people they deserve bad treatment. You said the most important thing was not to believe those lies." Lydia came over and sat on the couch arm. "You saved my family. You didn't lower your eyes then." Malik stood and began pacing the small living room. "This case has to grow bigger, Mama, because if Vanessa planted that bracelet on you, she's probably done it to other people who couldn't fight back." Simone looked up from her papers. "Malik's right. The security camera malfunctions, the smooth operation, Victor Langston's immediate involvement. This feels like a system, not a single incident." Her phone rang, interrupting the conversation. She answered quickly, listened for several minutes, then hung up with a grim smile. That was my investigator. The court records I requested came through. She shuffled through a stack of documents. In the past year, Vanessa Hargrove has filed theft accusations against 3 other women at her boutique. All black, all over 65. All cases resulted in plea bargains or fines because the defendants couldn't afford extended legal battles. The room went silent. Eleanor's hands trembled as the implications sank in. The security cameras malfunctioned during all 3 incidents, Simone continued, and Victor Langston made donations to the Police Benevolent Fund within days of each case being resolved. Lydia whispered,
"She's been hunting old ladies."
Malik stopped pacing. What were their names? Simone Parker's law office occupied the 2nd floor of a narrow brick building downtown, wedged between a bail bondsman and a check-cashing store. The waiting room held 4 mismatched chairs and a coffee table stacked with legal aid pamphlets. Her actual office wasn't much larger, but the walls were lined with law books and framed certificates that spoke of decades fighting for people who couldn't afford better representation. Malik, Darius, and Eleanor sat across from Simone's desk, while she spread the court documents like puzzle pieces across the scratched wooden surface. The afternoon sun slanted through the single window, casting shadows over the papers that detailed 3 separate cases against elderly black women at Hargrove Jewelers. Dorothy Washington, age 68, Simone read from the first file, accused of stealing a gold chain last year. Security cameras malfunctioned during the incident. Officer Derek Shaw responded. Dorothy couldn't afford an attorney, accepted a plea deal, and paid $800 in restitution plus court costs. She moved to the second file. Bernice Collins, 71 years old, accused of concealing a pair of earrings in her coat sleeve. Same story. Broken cameras. Officer Derek Shaw. Immediate pressure to settle. Bernice worked part-time at the grocery deli to supplement her Social Security. After the arrest, the store fired her for having theft charges on her record. Eleanor's face grew paler with each name. She gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles showing white against her dark skin. The third victim is Ruth Hendricks, age 65, Simone continued, accused of switching price tags on a bracelet. Ruth insisted she was innocent, but the stress of fighting the case gave her a heart attack. She accepted the plea deal from her hospital bed rather than face trial. Malik leaned forward, studying the dates. All within a year, all the same pattern. And look at this. Simone pointed to a notation in each file. Victor Langston made campaign donations to the Police Benevolent Association within a week of each case being resolved. Not huge amounts, $500 to $1,000 each time. Just enough to look like civic support, not bribery. Darius's hands clenched into fists on his knees. They've been hunting grandmothers for sport. It's worse than that, Simone said grimly. They targeted women who fit a specific profile. Elderly, black, modest income, shopping alone, women who would be too embarrassed to fight back, too poor to hire lawyers, too isolated to generate public support. Eleanor finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. But why me? I barely had enough money for a child's bracelet. What did they gain? Practice, Malik said, the military strategist in him analyzing the enemy's tactics. Each case taught them how to refine the system, how to pick victims, how to plant evidence, how to pressure quick settlements. Dorothy Washington shopped at that boutique for years, Simone added, checking her notes. She told the public defender that Vanessa knew her by name, knew she was a regular customer. That's what made the accusation so devastating. Someone she trusted turned on her. Eleanor closed her eyes. Ruth Hendricks goes to my church. She had that heart attack right after her arrest. We all thought it was just her age and stress from her husband's death. We never knew. She never told anyone about the charges. Shame kept her quiet, just like they planned, Simone confirmed. Darius stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. I'm done listening to this. We need to go to that mall right now and put Vanessa's face on the evening news. Let her explain why she's been framing senior citizens. And accomplish what? Malik asked sharply. Getting yourself arrested? Giving them ammunition to claim we're intimidating witnesses? Sometimes intimidating the right people is exactly what you need to do. This isn't a combat zone, Darius. We can't kick down doors and demand answers. We need evidence that survives cross-examination in court. While more grandmothers get targeted? Eleanor opened her eyes and looked at both her sons.
What kind of evidence?
Simone tapped her pen against the desk. Security footage from a source they didn't control. Witness testimony from someone who saw the planting. Financial records showing the pattern of donations. Something concrete that proves conspiracy.
The mall has dozens of cameras, Malik said thoughtfully. Even if Vanessa controls the boutique system and bribes mall security, there might be angles she doesn't know about.
What do you mean? Store cameras, service cameras, maintenance equipment, places that record automatically without human operators. Malik was already reaching for his jacket. We need to map that mall like a reconnaissance mission. An hour later, they walked through the main entrance of Oakwood Crossing Mall. Eleanor had wanted to stay at Simone's office, but Malik insisted she come along. You need to see exactly where everything happened, he explained. And people need to see you here, walking free, not hiding in shame. The mall buzzed with afternoon shoppers, most unaware of the previous drama. But several people recognized Eleanor from the news coverage, and their reactions varied wildly. Some stared with curiosity, others nodded respectfully. A few whispered to their companions and pointed. Darius stayed close to his mother's right side, Malik on her left, both scanning the crowd for trouble. They walked slowly past the boutique entrance where it all began. Vanessa stood behind the counter helping a customer, but her eyes tracked Eleanor's movement through the glass storefront. She looked confident, almost smug. Note the angle, Malik said quietly. She can see the hallway, the bench where Derek Shaw dumped your purse, the exact spot where she pulled the bracelet from your pocket. They continued toward the food court, mapping sight lines and camera positions. The mall's security cameras were obvious, black domes mounted every 50 feet along the ceiling. But Malik noted smaller devices, the promotional cameras at the children's play area, the loss prevention systems in individual stores, the maintenance monitoring equipment near service corridors. There, he pointed to a narrow hallway beside the food court. Service entrance? Every mall has maintenance cameras to monitor after-hours access. They approached the hallway cautiously. A woman in gray coveralls was mopping near the service door, her cart blocking most of the corridor. She was middle-aged, Latina, with careful eyes that missed nothing. As they got closer, the woman glanced up and immediately recognized Eleanor. Her expression shifted from neutral to sympathetic, then to something that looked like fear. Darius stepped forward, his voice gentle. "Excuse me, ma'am. We're just looking around, trying to understand what happened yesterday." The woman continued mopping, but her movements became tense. She looked over her shoulder toward the main corridor, then back at Darius. Finally, she moved closer to him, close enough that her voice wouldn't carry beyond the service hallway.
"I saw her put it in your mama's pocket," she whispered.
Darius's heart hammered against his chest. He glanced quickly at Malik, then back at the woman whose hands trembled around her mop handle. "What's your name, ma'am?" Darius asked softly.
Rosa Martinez."
Her voice was barely above a whisper. She kept looking toward the main corridor like someone might appear at any moment. "I clean this section every day. I was right there by the jewelry store, emptying trash cans." Malik stepped closer, his voice calm and reassuring. "Rosa, what exactly did you see?"
"The lady with the white hair came out of the store. Your mama. She looked sad, like she couldn't afford what she wanted."
Rosa's English was careful, precise.
"Then that woman from inside, the manager, she came running after her. But before she started yelling..."
Rosa paused, wiping her hands on her coveralls.
"Before she started yelling about stealing, I saw her bump into your mama, real quick, like an accident. But it wasn't no accident."
Eleanor spoke for the first time since they had entered the hallway.
"You saw her put something in my pocket?"
"Yes, Senora. She brushed against your sweater, and her hand went into your pocket. Fast. Then she stepped back and started screaming that you stole something." Rosa's voice grew stronger with each word.
"I knew it was wrong, but I..."
"Why didn't you say anything?" Darius asked.
though his tone held no judgment. Rosa looked down at her mop bucket. Because that man, the councilman who came yesterday, Victor Langston, he got my cousin fired last year for complaining about overtime pay, and he told the managers here that workers who cause trouble might have their papers checked real careful. Malik's jaw tightened. Papers? I've been here 15 years. Legal. But there was a mix-up with my green card renewal a few years back. Everything got sorted, but there's still some confusion in the computer system. People like him, they find ways to use that confusion against you. The fear in her voice was raw, honest. Eleanor reached out and touched Rosa's arm gently. Mija, I understand. I've been poor my whole life. I know what it means to keep your head down to keep your job. But your job shouldn't depend on watching innocent people get framed, Darius said, his anger building. That's not keeping your head down. That's letting evil win. Malik shot his brother a warning look. Darius. No, Malik. This woman saw the truth, and she's being terrorized into silence by the same people who are trying to destroy Mama. Rosa's eyes filled with tears. You think I don't know that? You think I wanted to watch them hurt your mama? But I got 3 kids. My husband drives a delivery truck. We can't survive if I lose this job. We can protect you, Malik said firmly. Our attorney can file papers to prevent retaliation. We can document the threats. We can... You can't protect me from people who control the contracts for half the businesses in this city, Rosa interrupted. You don't understand how deep this goes. She glanced toward the main corridor again, and her face went white. A security guard was walking toward them, tall, thin, nervous-looking. His name tag read Lennox Hayes. Problem here? Lennox asked, but his voice carried more anxiety than authority. Rosa immediately started pushing her cart toward the service door. No problem. Just finishing up. Ma'am, Malik called after her. Please, we need your statement. But Rosa was already at the door, fumbling with her keys. She looked back once, her expression torn between guilt and terror. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. The service door slammed behind her. Lennox watched her go, then turned back to the Bell family. Y'all need to move along. This is a restricted area. We're just talking, Darius said, his voice hard. Well, talk somewhere else. Mall policy. Malik put a hand on Darius's arm. Let's go. They walked back toward the main corridor in intense silence, Lennox trailing behind them until they reached the food court. Later that evening, Eleanor sat in her tiny living room, surrounded by the 2 men who had once been the smallest babies she had ever held. The house felt even smaller with their broad shoulders and military bearing filling the space. The walls were covered with photographs spanning decades. Malik and Darius in mismatched school uniforms from the thrift store, graduation pictures in borrowed caps and gowns, their military academy photos with backs straight and faces proud, recent pictures from their deployments in desert camouflage with medals gleaming. Each photo represented a sacrifice Eleanor had made. Extra shifts to buy school supplies, skipped meals to pay for their field trips, second-hand everything so they could have something. Malik sat on the worn couch beside her, studying a photo of himself and Darius at their high school graduation. They were flanking Eleanor, all 3 beaming despite the cheap camera and faded colors. Mama, Malik said quietly, that woman today, Rosa, she's the key to everything. If we can get her testimony. Baby, you heard what she said. These people got power over her whole life. Darius paced across the small room, his frustration filling every corner. So we just let them win? We let them keep targeting grandmothers because one witness is scared? I'm not saying that. Then what are you saying? Eleanor stood up slowly, her joints protesting after the stress of the last few days. She walked to the mantel and picked up a photo of the twins in their dress blues from Malik's promotion ceremony. I'm saying I raise soldiers, not shields. Don't let my trouble destroy you. Eleanor's kitchen looked smaller with 5 people crowded around the chipped formica table. Steam rose from her old coffee pot as she served everyone in mismatched mugs. Lydia sat beside Simone Parker, both women hunched over legal papers. Malik and Darius flanked their mother like sentries. The morning light streaming through faded curtains made Eleanor's exhaustion visible. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee. We need something concrete, Simone said, reviewing her notes. Rosa's testimony would be powerful, but without her cooperation. What about other cameras? Lydia asked suddenly. I mean, that mall's got security everywhere. All the crucial angles went dark, Malik replied grimly. Several minutes of convenient blackout. Lydia frowned, stirring sugar into her coffee. Wait, what about the kiddie train? Everyone looked at her. The little train ride near the jewelry store. My daughter loves it. They got this tiny camera on the front that records promotional stuff. You know, happy families riding around. Stuff they put on their website. Darius straightened. You think it was running during Mama's arrest? It runs every day from opening to closing. Takes a loop right past Hargrove Jewelers. Simone leaned forward. That camera wouldn't be connected to the mall's security system. Probably runs on its own memory card, Malik added, hope creeping into his voice. Within an hour, they were back at Oakwood Crossing Mall. The children's train sat parked near the central fountain, its bright red engine decorated with cartoon animals. A weathered white man in his late 60s was checking the tracks. You Frank Morrison? Darius asked, approaching with Malik. The man looked up, taking in their military bearing. That's right. You boys veterans? Marines. Major Malik Brooks. Major Darius Brooks. Frank's face lit up. Well, I'll be damned. Welcome home, Marines. He stood, extending a calloused hand. Army myself. 3 tours in Vietnam. Mr. Morrison, we need your help with something, Malik said. Our mother was falsely arrested here recently, right in front of your train route. Frank's expression hardened. I heard about that. Elderly black lady, right? Whole thing looked fishy to me. Did your promotional camera capture anything? Frank glanced around, then motioned them closer. Follow me to the storage shed behind the mall. Frank led them to a small maintenance building. Inside, he pulled out an old laptop and a handful of memory cards. I save all the footage for the promotional videos, he said, inserting a card. Let's see, recently. Around what time? Around midday, Darius said. Frank scrolled through files, then stopped. Here we go. The small screen showed the train's forward view as it rounded the curve past Hargrove Jewelers. There was Eleanor in her blue cardigan, looking uncomfortable outside the boutique. Vanessa emerged from the store, walking quickly toward her. Can you slow it down? Malik asked. Frank adjusted the playback speed. The footage became crystal clear. Vanessa approached Eleanor, gesturing angrily. Then, as she stepped closer to point toward the store entrance, her right hand brushed against Eleanor's left side. The motion was subtle, but deliberate. Son of a... Frank muttered. She planted something on that poor woman. Can you make copies? Simone asked, appearing beside them. Already burning one to disk. 2 hours later, Simone stood before Judge Thornton in an emergency hearing. The courtroom was packed with supporters wearing Justice for Mama Ellie t-shirts. Your Honor, this video evidence clearly shows the alleged theft was a fabrication, Simone argued, playing the footage on the courtroom's display screen. The crowd murmured as Vanessa's deliberate motion played in slow motion. Victor Langston's attorney, a sharp-dressed man named Davidson, rose immediately. Your Honor, this footage has clearly been tampered with. The metadata shows multiple digital alterations. That's impossible, Simone protested. Mr. Morrison saved this directly from his camera's memory card. Digital timestamps can be manipulated by anyone with basic computer skills, Davidson countered smoothly. We believe the defendant's military connections provided access to sophisticated equipment. Judge Thornton examined the technical report Davidson submitted. The metadata analysis does show irregularities. This is ridiculous, Malik said under his breath. But worse was coming. Davidson called Lennox Hayes to the witness stand. The nervous security guard avoided eye contact with the Bell family as he swore his oath. Mr. Hayes, did you witness the incident at Hargrove Jewelers recently? Yes, sir. I was doing my rounds when I seen the old lady slip that bracelet into her sweater. You saw Mrs. Brooks steal the bracelet? Clear as day. She looked around first, then grabbed it when she thought nobody was watching. Eleanor's face crumpled. She gripped Malik's hand so tightly her knuckles went white. Simone cross-examined aggressively, but Lennox stuck to his story despite obvious nervousness. Judge Thornton denied the motion to dismiss. As they filed out of the courtroom, Davidson approached Malik with a manila envelope. Perhaps this will help your family understand the gravity of the situation, he said, handing over the paper. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Victor Langston stepped to the microphones, his silver hair gleaming in the sunlight. "These documents raise serious questions about Mrs. Brooks's history with legal compliance," he announced. "We cannot allow emotional manipulation to override due process." Malik tore open the envelope as cameras flashed around them. His face went deadly pale as he read the child welfare document dated decades ago. The papers claimed Eleanor had illegally obtained custody of Malik and Darius through fraudulent means. They suggested she had connections to black market adoption rings and had forged signatures on official documents. Eleanor looked over his shoulder, her reading glasses sliding down her nose. Her breath came in short gasps. "That's not... I never..." she whispered. Malik's hands shook as he studied the signatures and dates. Something was wrong with the document, but he couldn't pinpoint what. The crowd of reporters pressed closer, shouting questions about adoption fraud and family secrets. Eleanor's knees buckled. Darius caught her before she fell, his face twisted with rage and desperation. Malik looked up from the papers, his voice barely audible above the chaos. "Someone wanted us buried before we could walk." Simone's law office felt smaller, with 4 people crowded around her desk. The afternoon sun slanted through dusty blinds, casting shadows across scattered legal papers. Eleanor sat in the corner chair, still shaken from the courthouse ambush. Her hands trembled as she held a cup of sweet tea Lydia had brought from the diner. Malik spread the leaked child welfare document flat on Simone's desk. His finger traced each line with military precision. The twins had changed from their dress uniforms into civilian clothes, but their posture remained rigid with controlled fury. "Look at this signature," Malik said, pointing to the bottom of the page. "Sarah Mathewson, Child Welfare Supervisor." Simone pulled out her laptop and began typing. Her fingers flew across the keys as she accessed state records. "Sarah Mathewson died in March of that year," she announced after several minutes. "But this document is dated September of that year." Darius leaned forward. "She signed it 6 months after she died? Impossible." Malik's voice was deadly quiet. "This whole thing is fake." Eleanor looked up from her tea, confusion clouding her eyes. "But they had official papers when they came to take you boys. The woman from the county said I wasn't fit." "What woman?" Simone asked gently. "She never gave her real name, just said she worked for child services, had a badge and everything." Eleanor's voice grew stronger as the memory sharpened. "She kept saying the boys belonged somewhere better, somewhere proper." Malik and Darius exchanged glances. They had heard fragments of this story over the years, but Eleanor had always been vague about the details. "Mama, what exactly did she look like?" Darius asked. "Tall white woman, blonde hair pulled back tight, expensive clothes. She talked down to me like I was dirt under her shoes." Eleanor paused, then added quietly, "She had the same mean eyes as that Vanessa woman." Simone continued typing, pulling up old county adoption records. "If someone was trying to remove you boys illegally, there should be a paper trail. Try Mount Zion Baptist Church records," Malik suggested. "That's where Mama found us." While Simone searched, Malik walked to the window. The late afternoon traffic crawled past, but his mind was racing through possibilities. "Mama, you said the boys were left with a blanket. Was there anything else?" Eleanor closed her eyes, thinking back decades. "There was a note, just a scrap of paper tucked in with them." "What did it say?" "Please keep them safe. The father's family will try to take them." "I kept that note for years, but it got lost when the roof leaked." Simone looked up from her computer. "I found something. Church records show 2 infant boys were abandoned outside Mount Zion around that time. But there's also a county inquiry filed the same month by someone requesting information about displaced children of domestic workers." "Who filed it?" Darius demanded. "Langston Family Trust." The room went silent except for the hum of the air conditioner. Malik turned from the window, his face carved from stone. "They were looking for you boys specifically," Simone continued. "This wasn't random. Someone knew where you came from." Eleanor stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I don't understand. Why would rich white folks want 2 black babies?" Simone pulled up employment records. "Let me check employment records for the Langston household around that time." Her typing filled the silence. Outside, car horns honked as rush hour traffic thickened. Inside, 4 people held their breath. "Here," Simone said finally. Lorna Bell, employed as live-in housekeeper for the Langston estate from early that period until late the previous year, terminated due to medical leave. Malik felt the blood drain from his face. "Lorna Bell, same last name as you boys," Simone observed. "Mama named us after the church bell that was ringing when she found us," Darius said slowly. "But what if our birth mother's name was already Bell?" Malik finished. Eleanor sank back into her chair. "All these years I thought I saved 2 abandoned babies, but they weren't abandoned. They were hidden. And when the Langstons couldn't get you through official channels, they tried intimidation," Simone concluded. Malik picked up his phone and pulled up Victor Langston's campaign website. The councilman's polished face smiled back at him, promising traditional family values and protecting our community's future. The campaign biography mentioned Victor's father, Harrison Langston, who had built the family business through hard work and moral leadership. Harrison had died years ago, taking his secrets with him. Darius read over Malik's shoulder, his jaw tightening with each line of political rhetoric. "He did this because Mama saved us." Rain tapped against the windows of Eleanor's small living room like nervous fingers. The sound had been steady for an hour, matching the rhythm of her rocking chair as she sat wrapped in a quilt the twins had sent her from overseas. The house felt cramped with all 4 of them there: Eleanor, Malik, Darius, and Simone. But it was the safest place to talk without Victor Langston's eyes watching. The coffee table held scattered legal papers, printouts of old records, and the remnants of a dinner nobody had much appetite for. Eleanor's Bible lay open beside her teacup, its pages worn soft from years of worry and prayer. A soft knock at the front door made everyone freeze. Malik moved to the window and peered through the curtain. "It's a woman, Hispanic. She's alone. Rosa," Darius said, recognizing her silhouette under the porch light. Eleanor nodded, and Malik opened the door. Rosa Martinez stepped inside, her cleaning uniform soaked from the rain. She clutched a small backpack against her chest like it contained something precious. "I'm sorry for running away," she said, water dripping from her hair onto Eleanor's clean floor. "But I had to think. I had to be sure." "Sure about what?" Simone asked, setting down her laptop. Rosa looked directly at Eleanor. "That I could live with staying quiet while they destroy you." She unzipped the backpack and pulled out a tablet computer. Her hands shook as she powered it on. "The mall has cleaning robots, little ones that go around at night mopping and wiping down surfaces. Nobody pays attention to them. They're just there." Malik leaned forward. "And? They have cameras, small ones for navigation and safety. The footage gets uploaded automatically to the maintenance company's cloud system every morning." Darius's eyes widened. "The company my nephew works for services those robots. He pulled the backup before mall security could have it deleted." The tablet screen flickered to life, showing a video player interface. Rosa's finger hovered over the play button. "This is from the robot that was cleaning near the boutique entrance when it happened." She pressed play. The video was grainy but clear enough. The timestamp showed around midday, exactly when Vanessa claimed her camera had malfunctioned. From the robot's low angle, they could see legs, shoes, and the lower portion of the jewelry store entrance. Vanessa's designer heels clicked into frame. She bent down, her hand reaching into the display case. She palmed something small and glittering, then stepped back outside the store. "She's stealing from her own inventory," Simone whispered. The video continued. Eleanor's sensible flats appeared, moving slowly toward the boutique. Vanessa positioned herself near the entrance, pretending to organize a display. When Eleanor passed, Vanessa bumped into her hand moving quickly to Eleanor's cardigan pocket. The planting was swift, practiced, deliberate. Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. But the video wasn't finished. Officer Derek Shaw's polished boots entered the frame. He spoke with Vanessa for nearly several minutes before the arrest. Plenty of time for coordination. Then came the audio that made everyone in the room go rigid. Vanessa's voice, captured by the robot's sensitive microphones. "The old woman won't fight. They never do. These people know their place. The sound was crystal clear, cold, calculating, racist. Eleanor stopped rocking. The quilt slipped from her shoulders. On the screen, Lennox Hayes appeared, speaking with someone off camera. A hand extended into frame. Victor Langston's manicured fingers passing Lennox a white envelope. "That's tomorrow's security bonus," Victor's voice said clearly, "for handling this professionally." Lennox nodded and pocketed the envelope. The video ended. The room fell into stunned silence except for the rain drumming harder against the windows. Eleanor's teacup rattled as she set it down with trembling hand. Rosa spoke softly. "My nephew says this footage is legally obtained through the maintenance contract. It can't be thrown out or called tampered evidence." Simone was already typing on her laptop, her fingers flying across the keys. "This changes everything. Conspiracy, bribery, false reporting, civil rights violations." Malik stared at the black tablet screen. How many other women heard those words before they were arrested? "These people know their place," Darius repeated, his voice like broken glass. Eleanor had not spoken since the video ended. She sat perfectly still, her weathered hands folded in her lap. The shame that had weighed her down for days was transforming into something harder, sharper. She thought about every time she had lowered her eyes, every time she had stayed quiet to keep peace, every time she had taught the boys to be careful, to survive, to not make waves. "The old woman won't fight." Eleanor stood from her chair, her back straight despite her 72 years. Her voice was steady when she finally spoke. "Then tomorrow this old woman fights." The morning sun streamed through the glass ceiling of Oakwood Crossing Mall, casting long shadows across the polished floors. The central court had been transformed into a ceremony space, with folding chairs arranged in neat rows, a small platform draped with red, white, and blue bunting, and American flags flanking both sides. Veterans in dress uniforms mingled with their families. Local reporters checked their equipment. City council members shook hands and smiled for cameras. At the jewelry boutique, Vanessa Hargrove stood behind her counter as if the past few days had never happened, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her smile practiced and cold. Officer Derek Shaw walked his security route through the crowd, his chest puffed out, his hand resting on his radio. He nodded respectfully to the veterans and officials, playing the part of the dedicated public servant. Near the ceremony platform, Councilman Victor Langston adjusted his tie and rehearsed his speech under his breath. This was supposed to be his moment, honoring local heroes while positioning himself as the law and order candidate who supported both veterans and local businesses. Then the crowd near the main entrance began to part. Eleanor Brooks walked through the mall corridor with her head high, flanked by her sons in full military dress uniform. She wore a simple white dress that made her dark skin glow, and pinned to her chest was a small silver brooch, the first gift Malik and Darius had bought her with money from their military paychecks years ago. Behind them walked Simone Parker in a sharp navy suit carrying a briefcase and tablet. Lydia Harper held her daughter's hand while recording everything on her phone. Frank Morrison moved slowly but determinedly, his veteran's cap perfectly positioned. Rosa Martinez stayed close to the group, her fear visible but her resolve stronger. The crowd recognized Eleanor immediately. Whispers rippled through the ceremony space. Some people pointed. Others pulled out phones. Veterans who had seen the arrest video online stepped aside respectfully, their faces grim. Victor Langston's smile faltered when he spotted the group approaching. He moved quickly to intercept them, his polished shoes clicking against the tile floor. "Ms. Parker," he said loudly enough for nearby reporters to hear, "I hope you're not planning to disrupt a ceremony honoring our local heroes with baseless accusations." Malik stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying the authority of command. "Councilman Langston, the district attorney and state investigators are already present. They're here as guests, but they brought handcuffs if needed." Victor's eyes darted around the crowd, suddenly noticing the serious-faced men and women in dark suits positioned near the exits. His campaign manager appeared at his elbow, whispering urgently about damage control. Officer Derek Shaw had noticed the commotion and approached with his hand on his radio. "Is there a problem here?" Darius turned to face him directly, his metals catching the mall's bright lights. "You took an oath to serve and protect, Shaw." You should have been protecting elderly women from criminals, not serving wealthy families who wanted to frame them. Shaw's face reddened. I did my job. I arrested someone caught stealing. You arrested an innocent woman after taking orders from people who paid you to ignore the truth, Darius replied, his voice carrying across the ceremony space. That's not police work. That's corruption. The crowd was listening now, the ceremony forgotten as drama unfolded in real time. Reporters pushed closer with cameras and microphones. Veterans who had served honorably watched with disgust as one of their own prepared to expose law enforcement corruption. Vanessa appeared at the edge of her boutique, her face pale but defiant. This is harassment, she called out. We're trying to run a business. You're trying to run a theft scheme, Rosa said suddenly, her voice shaking but clear. I saw everything. Victor grabbed his campaign manager's arm. Get security. End this circus now. But Simone was already moving toward the ceremony platform, her briefcase in one hand and tablet in the other. She climbed the 3 steps with confidence, then turned to address the crowd that had gathered for what they thought would be a simple veteran appreciation ceremony. The mall fell silent, except for the distant hum of escalators and fountain water. Simone's voice carried clearly through the space, professional but filled with righteous anger. Before today's honors, the public needs to see a crime. Simone raised the tablet high above her head, its screen glowing bright against the mall's lights. What you're about to see was recorded by automated cleaning equipment that uploads to a maintenance company cloud server. This footage has been authenticated by digital forensics experts and verified by the State Attorney General's office. The large screen behind the ceremony platform flickered to life. The Veterans Appreciation slideshow disappeared, replaced by grainy but clear surveillance footage time-stamped recently. The crowd pressed closer, phones rising to record what played on the screen. There was Vanessa Hargrove behind the jewelry counter, alone in her boutique. Her movements were casual, confident. She opened a display case and removed a silver bracelet, slipping it into her blazer pocket. Then she waited, watching through the glass storefront. This shows Ms. Hargrove stealing from her own inventory, Simone announced, her voice cutting through the mall's stunned silence. The footage continued. Eleanor appeared on screen, walking slowly past the boutique in her blue cardigan and floral dress. She looked small, harmless, carrying nothing but her worn purse. Vanessa moved quickly then, exiting the store and deliberately bumping into Eleanor. The camera angle showed Vanessa's hand moving toward Eleanor's cardigan pocket in one smooth motion. Eleanor stumbled slightly, apologizing even though she had done nothing wrong. There, Simone said, pointing at the screen. Ms. Hargrove plants the bracelet she stole into Mrs. Brooks's pocket. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Several veterans shook their heads in disgust. Reporters scribbled notes furiously while their cameras captured every moment. The footage jumped forward. Officer Derek Shaw appeared, but instead of investigating, he walked directly to Vanessa. They spoke briefly, their heads close together. Derek Shaw nodded several times, then approached Eleanor with his hand already reaching for handcuffs. This shows Officer Shaw coordinating with the real thief before making a false arrest, Simone continued. But the most damning footage came last. Victor Langston appeared on screen, standing near the mall security office with Lennox Hayes. Victor handed Lennox a thick envelope. They shook hands like business partners closing a deal. The crowd erupted in angry shouts. Victor stepped backward, his face draining of color. That footage is fabricated, Vanessa shrieked from the boutique entrance. They made it up. They're criminals. But Lennox Hayes was already cracking under the pressure. His hands shook as dozens of eyes turned toward him. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the mall's air conditioning. I can't do this anymore, Lennox stammered, his voice barely audible over the crowd noise. He paid me to say I saw the old lady take it. $500 to lie in court. The confession hit like lightning. Reporters surged forward with microphones. State investigators moved through the crowd with purpose, their badges visible on their belts. Mr. Hayes, one investigator called out, we need you to repeat that statement officially. Lennox's knees buckled. Victor Langston gave me money to lie about what I saw. The old woman never stole nothing. It was all planned. Officer Derek Shaw tried to fade into the crowd, but Darius's voice stopped him cold. Where are you going, Shaw? Don't you want to see how this ends? Two state investigators flanked Derek Shaw before he could respond. One of them held out her hand. "Badge and weapon, officer. You're under arrest for filing false reports, conspiracy, and participating in wrongful imprisonment." Derek Shaw's face went red with humiliation as his badge was stripped away in front of the crowd. The same crowd that had watched him brutalize Eleanor now saw him led away in shame. Vanessa made her move then, backing toward the boutique entrance. She probably thought she could escape through the service corridors behind the jewelry store, but mall security had been positioned at every exit. Two officers intercepted her before she reached the boutique door. "Vanessa Hargrove," the lead investigator announced. "You're under arrest for theft, filing false police reports, conspiracy to commit fraud, and elder abuse." The handcuffs clicked around Vanessa's wrists, in the exact spot where she had watched Eleanor being cuffed days earlier. The same shoppers who had stared at Eleanor with judgment now watched Vanessa's arrest with satisfaction. Victor's campaign staff scattered like roaches when lights come on. His manager threw campaign buttons onto the floor and disappeared into the crowd. Reporters surrounded Victor, shouting questions about forged documents, family corruption, and his connection to the twins' hidden history. Eleanor stood perfectly still, watching it all unfold. Her eyes were dry now. Her back was straight. When Vanessa passed by in handcuffs, their eyes met for one brief moment. Eleanor's voice was quiet but clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Now everybody can see." The crowd's energy shifted from anger to anticipation as District Attorney Elena Vargas stepped onto the platform. She wore a dark blue suit and carried herself with the authority of someone who had prosecuted corruption cases for years. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vargas began, her voice carrying across the mall without amplification. "Based on the evidence presented here today, all charges against Mrs. Eleanor Brooks are immediately dropped." The crowd erupted in cheers. Lydia hugged Rosa so hard they both nearly fell over. Frank Morrison wiped tears from his eyes with his veteran's cap. Vargas raised her hand for quiet. "Furthermore, the state of Georgia will launch full investigations into Oakwood Crossing Mall security practices, the conduct of Officer Derek Shaw, and the activities of Councilman Victor Langston." Victor tried to push through the crowd toward the exit, but reporters blocked his path. Camera flashes exploded around his face as he covered his eyes with his hands. "We will also reopen every case involving similar accusations at this shopping complex," Vargas continued. "Justice delayed is not justice denied." The ceremony coordinator, a nervous woman with a clipboard, approached the podium. District Attorney Vargas, we're supposed to honor Major Malik Brooks and Major Darius Brooks for their military service." Vargas nodded and gestured toward the twins. Major Brooks, please come forward." Malik and Darius walked to the platform together, their dress uniforms crisp under the mall lights. Their medals caught the overhead fluorescence as they moved. But instead of stopping at the podium, they turned toward Eleanor. "Mama?" Malik called out, extending his hand. "Come up here." Eleanor shook her head, suddenly shy again. "Baby, this is for you boys, not for me." "No, ma'am," Darius said firmly. "This is exactly for you." The twins walked back and gently guided Eleanor onto the platform. She moved slowly, still overwhelmed by everything that had happened. When she reached the microphone, Malik stepped up beside her. "Every medal on this uniform," Malik said, his voice carrying the same command presence he used with Marines. "Every commendation, every achievement, every moment of pride in my military career began with one decision decades ago." He looked directly at Eleanor. "A poor black woman found 2 abandoned babies and chose love over fear." Darius joined his brother at the microphone. His voice was rougher than Malik's, full of emotion he no longer tried to hide. "The world looked at our mama and called her poor," Darius said. "They saw her little house, her second-hand clothes, her minimum wage jobs. They thought she had nothing to give." He paused, letting his words sink in. "But we know different. We call her our inheritance." The crowd went completely silent. Even the reporters stopped scribbling notes. "She worked extra shifts to pay for Malik's surgery when we were young," Darius continued. "She walked miles to the grocery store because she spent bus money on our school supplies. She gave us her dinner plate when there wasn't enough food." Malik stepped forward. "She taught us that honor isn't something you wear on your chest. It's something you carry in your heart." The applause started slowly, with Frank Morrison clapping his weathered hands. Then Lydia joined in, tears streaming down her face. Rosa clapped so hard her palms turned red. The sound built until the entire mall echoed with thunderous approval. Eleanor stood between her sons, no longer the frightened woman who had been dragged through this same corridor in handcuffs. Her back was straight, her chin was raised. She smiled through her tears as hundreds of strangers gave her the respect she had earned, but rarely received. The ovation lasted several minutes. In the weeks that followed, justice moved swiftly. The mall ownership group settled with Eleanor for an undisclosed amount that local newspapers described as substantial. Victor Langston's mayoral campaign collapsed overnight. His political career ended when federal investigators uncovered a pattern of intimidation and corruption dating back years. The 3 elderly women who had been falsely accused before Eleanor saw their cases reopened and their names cleared. Each received financial compensation and public apologies. Officer Derek Shaw was fired from the police department and charged with multiple felonies. Vanessa faced trial for theft, conspiracy, and elder abuse. Both would eventually serve prison time. The most lasting change came when the old Mount Zion Baptist Church, where Eleanor had first found the twins, was restored and renamed the Mama Ellie Justice House. The center provided free legal aid, hot meals, and emergency assistance specifically for seniors facing discrimination or abuse. In the time that followed, on a quiet morning, Eleanor returned to Oakwood Crossing Mall. This time she wasn't alone, and she wasn't afraid. Lydia's 6-year-old daughter, Aaliyah, skipped beside her wearing the simple silver charm bracelet that had started everything. The little girl had insisted on wearing her best dress to visit Mama Ellie at the place where she became famous. Malik and Darius walked several steps behind them, no longer the fierce protectors who had rushed to save their mother. Today they were simply sons accompanying the woman who raised them, enjoying a peaceful shopping trip. Near the food court, a little boy tugged his mother's sleeve and pointed at the twins. "Mommy, are those real soldiers?" The mother started to shush her child, but Eleanor smiled and knelt down to the boy's level. "They sure are, sweetheart," she said gently. "But you know what? Before they were soldiers, they were my babies." Eleanor stood tall again, her hand resting on Aaliyah's shoulder, surrounded by the respect she had always deserved but finally received.